Today's daf is daf Samach Gimel. Now, the Mishnah is addressing a new concept called tumas tahom, hatahom. And that's a tumas mes that was not yedua or gluya. It was not something that he knew about. And as we'll soon see, no one in the world knew about it. And then they discovered it later on. And the word tahom means something that's deep down under the surface and it's not exposed. It's musteres kitahom. And our halach l'Moshe Sinai is going to teach us a kula with regard to two cases. That's Nazir, who finds out about tumas tahom after he had already completed his nazirus, and it was even after his giluach, and he finds out that during the course of his nazirus, he had contracted tumas tahom. There's a special kula here, that this tumas tahom does not undermine his fulfillment of nazirus. And the same thing is going to apply in the case of a person who brought his korban pesach, and then he finds out that he, at the time of the korban pesach, he was tamei with tumas tahom, and it's not going to undermine his korban pesach. The Mishnah says Nazir shegilach, after he finishes his nazirus and he does tiglachas, he's already brought his karbanos. It's day 31 of his nazirus, so it's after the malos of his yimei nizro. V'nodalon, he finds out after the giluach shehu tamei, that he had contracted tumas mes during the time of his nazirus. And the Mishnah establishes that if he finds out tuma yedua, about a regular classic tuma that was not underneath the ground, but rather was a tuma yedua, just that he didn't know about it, is soser, then it undermines his entire nazirus, even though it was after his giluach. But because he had contracted the tumah during his yimei nazirus, therefore his yimei nazirus were, in truth, in effect, they were days of tumah. So he's got to start counting his nazirus again. But if tumas tahom, if he finds out that during his nazirus period he had contracted tumas tahom, eino soser, it's not soser. Now, this halacha only applies when he finds out after giluach. Giluach is going to be the clincher that concludes what's called Torah's Nazir. And if his yediyah was after Torah's Nazir and it was a yediyah about tumas tahom, it is not soteres. But ad shelo gileach, if he finds out about the tumah that he had contracted after his giluach, before his giluach, is ben kach u ben kach soser. In other words, it doesn't matter whether it's classic tuma yedua, whether it's tumas tahom, it's soser. Why? Because he finds out about his state of tuma before he completes his Torah's nazir with giluach. And this Mishnah reflects the sheet of Rabbi Eliezer, as we'll soon see in the Gemara, that tiglachas makeves ben nazir. The Chacham hold that as long as there was a zrikas dam of one of his various karbanos, that itself is matir his shtiyas yayin, his tumas mes, it clinches his nazirus. But we're going here, according to Rabbi Eliezer, that giluach makeves es hanazirus. Ketzad. Now the Mishnah goes on to describe what is tumas tahom. Yorad litbal b'ma'ara. He went down to a ma'ara, which is in a reshus hayachid, in some sort of a cave, and there's a mikveh there, and he went down to be tovel. And Tosfos and the Rosh explain that he was yored li tovel mitumas sheretz. The Mefarish has a different interpretation, that it was tumas mes, but now The nimtza, after he comes out of the ma'ara, he finds a kezayis min hames sof al pi hama'ara. So there's a mitame of tumas mes that's floating on the water surface, and he's not sure whether he was mahil over that kezayis min hames. In such a case, this is not tumas tahom, because sof al pi hama'ara means that it's obvious, it's visible, and it's not underneath the surface of the ground, and therefore we apply the classic principle of safek tum reshus hayachid sfeiko tameh. However, nimtza meshuka bekarka ma'ora, if he discovers a kezayis min hames that was covered in the floor of this ma'ora, in a place where he went to be tovel, and let's say he knows for sure, absolutely certain that he was nogea b'kezayis min hames, but this kezayis min hames is tumas tahom because it's covered, then his situation depends upon the following. If yarad lahaker, not the case that we mentioned earlier, where he was tamei tumas sheretz, and then he went down into the mikveh, but rather he was cooling himself off on a hot day, and he was becheskas tar, and now he completes his naziris with giluach, and he finds out that he had definitely come in contact with tuma mechusa bekarka hama'ara, is tar. Because here we're going to apply the halacha l'Moshe Sinai of tumas tahom, that tuma, even though when he finds out after giluach, he had contracted tuma while he was in the middle of his naziris, nevertheless it's not soser as naziris. And again, you might have argued that, if he goes down into the Ma'ara, maybe he should have been more careful to check out. Maybe he should have looked, investigated the karka to make sure that there's no tumah there. But nevertheless, he had a cheskes tar. However, now we have a different situation. He wasn't going down the lahaker just to cool off, but rather litar mitumas mes. In other words, he was in a state of tumah, and now the question is whether that tefillah was mitayr him. So in any event, he didn't know about the kezayis min hames was meshuka bekarkis hakarka, bekarka mor, and he went ahead and he completed his nazirus of tara. He brought his karbanos. He was megaleach, and now he finds out that when he went down to the Ma'ara some time ago, there was actually a kezayis mes meshuka bekarka, and he came in contact with it, is then tameh. It's not like the case in the Reisha of Yared Lahaker, we had a cheskas tara, but now he had a cheskas tuma because he went down to the Ma'ara to be tovel from tumas mes. And now we're going to apply the principle of cheskas tomei tomei and cheskas tar tar. Cheskas tomei tomei in the Sefer, where he went down to be tovel mishum tumas mes, and tar tar, cheskas tar tar, in the Reisha when he went li yoker. And therefore, if in the case, as we said earlier, of Yared Lahaker, he now finds out after his giluach that he had contracted tumah betumas tahom, because we're talking about a case of a kezayis meis meshuka bekarka ma'ara, then it's not soser as naziris and shereglayim l'davar. In other words, it's logical to assume that in this case, the halacha l'Moshe Sinai will apply that if he was a nazir tar before, he went down only lahaker, then tumas tahom does not have the power to soseres, to undermine his nazirus. Now, truth be told, This really has nothing to do with cheskas tamei and cheskas tar. Those principles apply when you have a suffix. Here we're not dealing with a suffix at all. However, the Gemara wants to suggest that when we analyze the scope and the application of the halach l'moshe v'sinei betumas tahom, we should do so in the light of these two chazakos, as if to say that it's more logical to say that tumas tahom is not so serious as nazirus in the case we had a cheskes tara than it is in the case where you had a cheskes tumah. There is, however, an indication in the Rambam in Pirush HaMishnayos that the Mishnah really has in mind the reasoning of Hamei Davar al Cheskaso Ad She'yivadel Choshen Nitma. And now we're up to the Gemara here on Daf Samach Gimel Amud Aleph. Minahani Mili. From whence do we derive this halacha that tumas tahom, when he finds out about it after his giluach, eina soseres? And in truth, what we're about to learn is what we call an asmachta, because the real source of this halacha is halacha l'moshe misinai. Amar Rabbi Lazar, and this is an amora, not to be confused with the Tana that we're going to have soon. The Omar Kra in the Parsha of Nazir, it says v'chi amus meis olav v'fesach fisom, and the extra word olav is teaching you b'mechuveres lo. Mechuveres means brura v'yedua lo. If the tumah was known to him, then it's not tumas tahom, and therefore v'timei rosh nizro, the Torah says, and it's yomim harishonim yiplu. Now we have the following. Just like in Nazir, tumas tahom is not going to create tumah and be soser as Nazir, so too, if a person is on his way to the Pesach, then tumas tahom is not metame. And this we're going to derive from Nazir to Osa Pesach. We'll see another shita in which it goes the reverse order, that from Osa Pesach we derive Nazir. But now we're deriving Osa Pesach min Nazir. So after his Asiyas Pesach, lo and behold, he finds out that he contracted Tumas Tahom. He doesn't have to go ahead and wait till Pesach Sheni. He was Yotzi already with Pesach Rishon. Reish Lakish Omar, Reish Lakish says that the din, this principle that Tumas Tahom is not metame, is derived from Pesach, not the way we saw it until now, that from Nazir we derive it to Pesach, but the other way around. Because in the parasha of Pesach Sheni, in Baloscha, it says, Ish ki yeh tamei lenefesh, o b'derech rechoka, etc. And the Torah says that in such a case of derech rechoka, he has to be pushed off to Pesach Sheni. And the tum has to be ki derech. It's described as a derech. Ma derech begolui, just like you have a road and everybody can see it. It's apparent and it's seeable to everybody. Af kol begolui. So too, the tum has to be like the derech. And the tum has to be a tuma gluya, yedua. But if he contracted tumas tahom, which is not gluya v'yedua, and he finds out after the Asiyas HaPesach, then he doesn't have to go back and push himself off to Pesach Sheni, but rather he was Yotze with Pesach Rishon. And the details of this law are derived from Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, that Tumas Tahom Eino Poselos Osa Pesach, but if it was Yadua Lo Kodem Asiyas HaPesach Shenitma Tumas Tahom, then he has to be pushed off to Pesach Sheni. So we're talking about a case where after the Asiyas HaPesach, lo and behold, he discovers that he was Tamei B'Tumas Tahom at the time of the Asiyas HaPesach. And now that we have a derivation of Tumas Tahom from Osa Pesach, we're going to derive Nazir by equation from Osei Pesach. So Reish Lakish has it the reverse order of Rabbi Loza. V'ela hadisnan, we have a brisa that's going to be brought on Samach Gimel Amid Beis. Eza hi tumas hatahom kol she'eno makira. It means afilu echad b'sof ha'olam. There's not one person in the world who recognizes this tumah, knows about the tumah. Avol makira echad. If one person somewhere on the globe knows about this tumah, even if b'sof ha'olam he's on the other side of the world, ein zu tumas tahom. Tumas tahom has to be that no one knows about it. Bishlei milaman diyomar. According to Reish Lakish, that derives tumas tahom from the hekesh to derech in the parsha of Pesach Sheni. Ki derech shapir. I understand very well that derech means gluya, and if there's one person somewhere at the end of the world who recognizes this tumah, it's not tumas tahom. It's Yidua Lo, and if it's Yidua Lo, it's Kiderech. Elamandi, according to Rabbi Loza, that derives Tumas Tahom from the parsha of Nazir. Namely, it says Kiyamus Meis Olav, and we emphasize the extra word Olav, and it's got to be Mechuveres Lo, that he knows about it. Is then it should depend upon his knowledge. Ki Makira, then if he himself, the Nazir, recognizes the Tumah, then it's Mechuveres Lo, then you could say it fulfills the Olav. But Echad B'sof Olam I Havi, what difference does it make if somebody on the other side of the world knows about this Tumah? Fine. So that person knows about the Tumah. But the Nazir himself doesn't know about the Tumah. It's Eina Mechuveres Lo. Visu, the Gemara raises a second objection. This one is going to be a kasha on both Rabbi Lozer and Reish Lakish. Hadis, you have a brisa later on again. We're going to bring this on Amid Beis. Hamotze mes mushkav lerochva shel derech. He discovers that there was a mess that was laying across the road, and it was hidden underneath some teven, sroros, whatever it was. And now we know for sure that somebody who passed that road contracted tumas oel. He was mahil al mes. But truma, if he wants to either eat or touch truma, tame, he's considered a tame. He's enjoined from eating truma. And if he comes in contact with truma, it makes the truma into truma tmeah. But Nazir b'siyas Pesach tar. Since this mess was binistar behelem, it was underneath teven or tzroros, that has the status of tumas tahom. So now the Gemara says, Maishna, why is it that in the case vis-a-vis the laws of truma, we consider him tameh? And we should say that according to Rabbi Loza, the same way we derive from Pesach from Nazir, we establish that tumas tahom is not metame, or alternatively, according to Reish Lakish, that we derive Nazir from Osah Pesach. But the law is that tumas tahom is not metame, so the same thing should apply to truma. Why is it that a person who passes over this derech, l'rochva shadech, is a mess, and it was tumas tahom? Why shouldn't he be tar as far as truma? Ella, says the Gemara, based on these two kashas, now we'll begin to understand that all these drashos of Reish Lakish and Reb Lozer are all asmachtos. Tumas tahom, Gemara, Gemirale, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai, it's not derived from psukim. All these psukim are only asmachtos. And halacha was given only with regard to Nazir and also Pesach, but with regard to other dinim, he is tameh. So there's a fascinating halacha here, because what it means is that if a person discovers that he was contaminated by tumas tahom, he is really tameh, because if he comes in contact with truma, it's going to be metame the truma, but yet he's tar as far as the dinim of Nazir and Pesach are concerned. The Mishnah says, im ad shelo gilach. Everything depends upon whether he found out about the tumas tahom before or after giluach. And in the case of tumas tahom, we have to have the idea after the Torah's Nazir was completed and terminated by what? By giluach mantana. Who is the Tana, the Machlokas Shin Rabbi Lazar and the Chachamim, who says that the Torah's Nazir continues until after giluach? Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Elazar, this Rabbi Elazar the Tana, the Amar Tiglachas Makeves. And this is a sugya that we learned back on Daf Mem Vav, if we could only remember that sugya so long ago, that records Machlokas Rabban Rabbi Eliezer. Until what point does Torah's Nazir continue? According to Chachamim, once there was a Zrikas Adam of one carbon of the Nazir Tahara, then the Nazirus is terminated. He's allowed to drink wine. He's allowed to go into a cemetery, etc., etc. He needs Giluah. So Giluah becomes a Chovas Gavra after he is already out of the picture of Torah's Nazir. And already even before the Tiglachas, he's allowed to drink wine and be Mitami Lamesa. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, the Torah's Nazir continues even after the Karbanos until the Giluah, because Tiglachas Ma'akeves. So according to the Rabbanon, who hold that Ein Tiglachas Ma'akeves, already at the point of Zrikas Adam, Torah's Nazir has terminated. And therefore, if he finds out about Tumas Tahom after the Zrikas Hadam and before the Tiglachas, just 1 second, it should be Lakula. Right, the Mishnah says that if he finds out before the Tiglachas, then it's so soon as Ziru. So it's only because he found out after his Tiglachas. That can't jive with the Rabbanan, because the Rabbanan don't have to wait for Tiglachas. He's already achieved his Siyum, his completion of the Torah's Nazir with the Karbanos, with the Zrikas Hadam. So if he's not a Nazir and then he finds out about Tumas Tahom, then according to the Rabbanan, even though it's before Giluach, nevertheless, he would remain tar. But according to Rabbi Eliezer, who holds Tiglachas Makeves, and the Torah's Nazir only terminates after Tiglachas, therefore, Kol Zman Shelo Gilach, if he finds out that he was Tameh, that would be Soser as Nazirus. Amazing. It's the same Nazirus. I'm sorry, it's the same Tumah. But it depends whether he found out before Tiglachas or after Tiglachas. So if he finds out before Tiglachas, that's Soser as Nazirus. And Allah Moshe Visina only applies after, when he had a idea post, subsequent to Torah's Nazir, which means, according to Rabbi Eliezer, after Tiglachas, and that's our mission. And now we're going to look at another machlokas, this time not between Rabbi Lazar and the Chacham, but between Rabbi Eliezer and the Chachamim, which is brought down on Daf Tes Vav. And we're talking about a case of a Nazir who contracted Tumah after Malos, Achar Malos Yemei Nizra. It means on day 31. But we have to emphasize over and over again that the Machlokas Rabban and Rabbi Eliezer on Tes Zayin is referring to a case where he contracted Tumah on day 31 before he brought his Karbanos. And the Rabbanan hold that in such a case, his Tumah would be Soser Nazirus, so he's got to start his Nazirus from scratch. Whereas Rabbi Eliezer holds that it's not Soser his Nazirus, he needs to wait 7 days until he can bring his Karbanos in order to be Matayr himself, B'shlishi, Pazos, Shlishi, Ushvi. However, that means that his Nazirus continues because he's still in a state of Tumah. He can't terminate his Nazirus until he gets out of the state of Tumah. So that's going to delay his Siyum Nazirus for another 7 days. But it's not a tumas oseres, because even though he hasn't brought his karbanos, nevertheless he's got the malos of Nazirus, and tuma after the malos of Nazirus does not generate a stiras hanazirus to make him a Nazir from scratch. Boy, Rami Bar Chama. Now, again, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag, but Rami Bar Chama is really asking a question according to Rabbi Eliezer, who says that after the malos, even before the karbanos, there's no stiras nazirus, it's only the 7-day delay. But we don't know that yet. So make believe I didn't say it. Nitma besoch malos, vinodalo liachar malos. What happened was he contracted tumas tahom during his Yemei Nazirus, but he only found out about it after the malos had passed, and it was before his giluach. Now, you and I would have said, and this is based on the guidelines that we've laid down today until this point, that in such a case, he certainly is soser his full-fledged 30 days in Nazirus, because he found out about the tumas tahom before the giluach. And we said that tiglachas ma'keves. However, if we go with the shita of Rabbi Eliezer that we mentioned earlier, that after the malos nazirus, if he contracts tumah, he would not be soser as nazirus, just the 7 days, then we might equate the case of nitma with the case of tumas tahom, even though tumas tahom, he was actually tameh during the time of his malos nazirus, but nevertheless, basar yediyas linon. And when was the yediyah? The yediyah was after he completed his yemei malos nazirus. Mal basar yediyas linon. So it means that for all intents and purposes, if he contracted tumah now, when he finds out about it, and until now it was tumas tahom, nobody knew about it. So in this case, we're going to say that the steer is only 7 days, and that's going like Rabbi Eliezer. The yediyah achar malosi. And that's Rabbi Eliezer's shita, that if you get a yediyah after the malos, even though he has not yet brought his karbanos, nevertheless, it's not soser as nazirus. Olo. Or should we say no? It's not basar yediyah as linon, but rather it's basar tumah as linon. He was tameh already besoch malos. And even though his tumas tahom, which we said is not so teres, but that's only because he didn't find out about it before his giluach. But here, he found out about it before his giluach. So according to Azlin Basar Tuma, not Azlin Basar Yediyah, then we cannot apply the principle and the kula of Tumas Tahom, and we go back to the Iker Din of Tuma Yedua, Shesel Teres, Kol Shloshim Yom. Ulamai. And what is Rabbi Bar Chama vacillating about? Lemistar. He wants to know if in this case he's soser 7 days, which means he has to delay his karbanos till after the Tara for 7 days. O shloshim, or should we say that it's soser kol shloshim? And the Gemara is going to try to argue now that we can be poshet the suffix of Rami Bar Chama from our Mishnah.